Welcome to a new session of the MIF conference. Today you will see a result of what Iran spoke about yesterday, about how to build networks, how to bring people together. And it's as a result of the work that Iran and his people in Hetz have been doing for the last 3 years. We will have this panel discussion. And you will learn how pro-Israel work is done, both in Ireland, in Belgium, in Germany, and in Great Britain. So I hope you look forward to this. And our first guest is Jackie Goodall. Please welcome. Welcome. Everybody loves Israel in Ireland, isn't it?
Sorry, everybody?
Everybody loves Israel.
In Ireland?
Yeah.
Well, there are some of us. Unfortunately, we are kind of known to be one of the most anti-Israel countries in Europe, if not the Western world. So, but there is support. There is support in Ireland for Israel. Yeah. Sometimes it's very quiet, unfortunately. There are a lot of people who do support Israel, but they prefer not to put their heads above the parapet and just kind of keep it on a quiet level. So we're trying to encourage more people to actually not be afraid to speak up.
And you are the leader of Israel. Ireland-Israel
Alliance? The Ireland-Israel Alliance, yes.
And how big is this alliance? And
we've probably got about 1,000 members, which we're very pleased about. We would like to grow it more. And we started up in 2018. Mm-hmm. We had a very fruitful 18 months, and then COVID hit, so we couldn't take our delegations to Israel and couldn't travel, obviously. So it's wonderful to be able to get out and about again and to meet supporters of Israel in Norway. So it's wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting me. Delighted to be here.
So what are you already touched about some of the main work that you do? What are some of the great successes that you have had, you would say?
Okay, well, probably the one that springs to mind is the defeat of the Occupied Territories Bill. This was a bill that actually passed through both houses of the Irish Parliament, the lower and the upper house, throughout 2018. It was a bill that was proposed by an independent senator, and what it effectively was asking for was to make it illegal for Irish citizens to trade with businesses in the Jewish heartland, i.e. Judea and Samaria.
And how did you manage to beat it down?
But before, but let me tell you what they were actually proposing. That citizens who did such a thing, who had the temerity to commit the crime of trading with businesses, they would be met with a €250,000 fine and or a 5-year prison term. So it was very, very extreme. So to get back to your question, what we did, we worked with a brilliant organisation, UK Lawyers for Israel, and one of representatives you'll hear later, Natasha Hausdorff, is very much involved with that. Yep. We worked with UK Lawyers for Israel in trying to find out how we could actually stop this bill. I mean, apart from it being a discriminatory bill, it was in fact illegal under EU trading laws. So Ireland is obviously a member of the European Union, and Ireland cannot make arbitrary laws which stipulate who we can and cannot trade with. So that's really what defeated the bill, and we put that forward to the Irish Parliament. We submitted a presentation to them.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
Worth an applause. So what are the biggest challenges you face?
Well, probably at the moment, the biggest challenge we face is the rise of the Sinn Féin party. Now, I don't know how many of you here have been to Ireland or what you know about Ireland, but the Sinn Féin party is in the ascendant. Sinn Féin were historically linked with the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, and there was training sessions going on between them and the PLO back in the 70s and 80s. So, needless to say, they are very, very anti-Israel. They're very, very outspoken. Anytime anything happens, they're up in arms. You know, not literally, but they're up in the Irish Parliament, castigating Israel, using sometimes the most vile language. So they are in the ascendant. In Northern Ireland, they are now, just only this past week, they are now the largest party in Northern Ireland. They've taken over from the DUP. So they have gained a lot of ground in the Republic of Ireland as well. So I suppose our greatest challenge at the moment is figuring out how we're going to deal with that issue when we have the next election. There's also a lot of extreme left-wing, hard left parties rising up as well. I don't think it's a problem that's unique to Ireland, that particular aspect. But I think every country is dealing with these issues in their own unique ways. And of course, in Ireland, we have the problem of our historical problems with the British colonising Ireland. So there's a lot of people, I should say, the nationalists would assume or try to say that Israel is now doing to the Palestinians what the British did to the Irish, which of course we know is not true. It's a distortion. It's a twisting of the truth. It's a twisting of the narrative. So that's probably where we are.
Yeah, it's time to bring in the next guest, Patricia Teitelbaum from Belgium Friends of Israel. Please give her a big welcome. So no left-wingers in Belgium, is it?
No, not at all. Let me explain in 2 words Belgium. Belgium is a tiny country, 11 million inhabitants, but we have like 3 regions, 5 parliaments, a political system of coalitions. So all the political parties are in some way in government. So it means that our politicians are not accountable for anything because they do not want to lose their seat in any of the levels where they are sitting in. So it means that, for example, I can go on?
Yeah, sure.
For example, our Minister of Development and Cooperation, Myriam Ekitir, has been asked in Parliament, because we pushed it with the Ambassador of Israel and NGO Monitor, whom we are working a lot, to ask questions about the fundings of terrorist activists. No reply, even in Parliament. Yeah. So when we write to those ministers who are responsible for horrible things like that, we get answers, but they are so, how shall I say, with no value. Yeah. So we have a lot of challenges in Belgium, a lot. Yeah, yeah. We say that Ireland is one of the top. I think Belgium is just near behind you.
But tell us a little bit about the community of Belgium Friends of Israel, what you're doing, who you are.
So we set up in 2018 Belgium Friends of Israel because there was not such an organization. Belgium is organized with a lot of Jewish organizations, but to tackle the issue of anti-Israel, nobody wants to do this anymore because it's dirty. And the Jewish organizations want to stay in contact with the politicians. Yep. So they, in a way, they don't want to hurt anyone. Mm. So we have launched our organization by organizing a conference. Mm. It was called Diversity, Israel Faces of Diversity. And we had a huge success in the heart of Brussels. We had ambassadors, politicians, and everybody said it was the first time such a thing has happened. Mm. But then COVID came along, so we also organized trips for churches and for Christians to Israel. And then with COVID, well, we had to change a little bit the attack angle. Mm-hmm. So we have been a lot on social media. And I think we have had a lot of success because, for example, Miriam Skitir, spokesman, is the daughter-in-law of the terrorists that Sean talked about us yesterday.
Again, so they understand, a spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
No, of Development and Cooperation. Yeah. Her spokeswoman is the daughter-in-law of the terrorist that Sean was talking about. I think his name is Ali. I always forget his name. It's too long. Well, anyway. So we have been calling it out on social media. And since then, this spokeswoman has never spoke again. So, but unfortunately, she's still in the post. So. Yeah. So what else can I tell you? We have a lot of challenges all the time because this anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism is all over the place. Politicians in the media, because the media in Belgium is the main media is funded by the state. Mm. So you hear only one voice in academics, in schools. So it's a challenge of many years of indoctrination. And I think that the pro-Palestinians have been doing very well because they have allied themselves with the unions, with the youth, which is, I think, one of our weakest points. But when I say we, I think we can say in Europe, we have to reach out more to the youngsters. We have to go on campuses. We have to go for the real fight. And it's not always easy to find people who are willing to do so because it is dirty. Yeah.
You're also involved with European Union politics, doing lobbying in the European
Yes,
Parliament?
yes, we do this, but with another organization. Yeah. Because also, Belgian Friends of Israel, only the name. We had a meeting in the Belgian Parliament with the head of the Middle East Committee. And he told us, listen, to be pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, pro-peace, that's our baseline. This is extreme today. Mm. So we all notice this, that the extreme left-wingers have, I can't find the word, have gone into the political spectrum, and now to be in their views are the view of the middle ground. Yeah. So that's really problematic. Mm.
We'll bring in the third guest now, Sacha Stawski from Germany. Please give him a big hand. Sacha is the leader of an organization called Honestly Concerned, and he also have many other organizations and efforts. He will describe it for you now. Welcome, Sacha.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I wear many hats. I should really tell you a little bit about why that is the case and what we do. The first organization which Conrad just mentioned is Honestly Concerned. Honestly Concerned is a political organization. We do media watch, we tread on toes, we point out to German politicians, and particularly also to the media, when they step out of line, when we see typical headlines saying, Israel killed Palestinian teenager in the headline, and only when you read the article, in the bottom of the article, you find out that this teenager was in fact 18 years old, heavily armed, and had just been about to shoot somebody else when he was killed. That's something that we work on, and we've been working very, very hard with our volunteers to get the media to pay more attention to their headlines and in terms of their general reporting.
Do you find that the media have to adjust as you pressure them?
I've been doing this for nearly 20 years. And it's very difficult to say that we've been majorly successful. Sure. Because it's every single individual success that you have to count. Yeah. And every time we do get a correction, that is a success. And yes, we have had many successes, particularly in recent times, actually. Yeah. It's very important not to get frustrated along the way. And really to look at each case individually. And every one of you, by the way, can do this. Yeah. It is our individual readers and the people that we do this kind of work for, that we point them to articles, and they write to their local editors. They get their letters published, or what's actually working the best at the moment is Twitter. One of my former employees is very, very active on Twitter, and they're taking note. And every other day now, he's getting apologies from them. He's getting corrections in articles, particularly with so many things happening in Israel right now. We've had headlines blaming Israel for the death of this Al Jazeera journalist right out when the facts are still unclear. We don't know how this journalist was really killed. It looks like it may very well not have been Israel that shot her, while the media coverage has been Israel did it. And that's where we set in. We try and get corrections done. We try and get the facts straight. We're not, and it's very important, by the way, to stress here, it is very important to be non-emotional and to be short, correct, and precise. So that's...
Very good. I have a challenge for you, Sacha.
Sure.
In 1 or 2 minutes, make them be tempted to come to Frankfurt on Tuesday.
That's the second organization. Thank you for getting me to talk about that. That's ILI, I Like Israel. So I talked about the political side, stepping on people's toes, getting on people's nerves, and getting them to do corrections and stuff. There's the other side, that really opens doors with politicians and opens hearts. And that's stressing all the positive things that are happening in Israel. For that, we have a separate newsletter, the ILI News, and we have separate events. Every year we organize Israel Days, nationwide. Before Corona, we had around 50 cities across Germany, usually around the Israeli Independence Day, organizing these events. Now, we're down to about 20 cities this year. Our event in Frankfurt is going to be in the middle of downtown, in the pedestrian area. We have a stage, we have music, we have information materials, we have a shuk, which is like an Israeli market, with where we're going to be selling all these wonderful things that you can normally buy in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or wherever at a market in Israel. We have Israeli food. It's fun. It's a beautiful event. And you can do it here, wherever you are.
You can book a ticket to Frankfurt.
Come and see it. No, it's great. We had an event. There was already Berlin last week. Stuttgart just took place. Now we have Frankfurt coming up. There's going to be events in Hamburg, Nuremberg, and wherever else. And it's amazing.
Yeah. It's really amazing.
So you're invited wherever you are here. I'd love to see Israel Days in Norway. Usually you can work with the Israeli embassy to get material. I don't know how they are here, but I'm sure they have little paper flags, Israeli flags. And I'm sure you can get somebody good to make falafel and Israeli music. People love it. And when you're downtown, by the way, some people said to me, but we do an event. We have it in our local synagogue. Or we have it in our community center. And I say, well, that's nice. You have a nice Yom Ha'atzmaut event. But that's not the idea. With Israel Days, we go downtown. We want to get the people who are going shopping, who are walking by, and who just look, oh, what's this music over here? Oh, they have some interesting food here. Let me try this falafel thing. That's the idea.
Would it be possible to do events like that in Belgium?
Well, actually, we do organize this since 2013. It's called the Shalom Festival. I'm part of the steering committee of the Israel Alliance. And we do it twice. We did it before COVID, I must say. Twice a year, once in Brussels, once in Antwerp. And it had a Christian connotation also, because we did it with Christian churches. So it was amazing also, downtown, in the heart of Brussels, in the heart of Antwerp. I must say in Antwerp we had more success than in Brussels, but okay, Brussels today is 30% Muslims. We have to know this.
But safety, security is okay? The police?
Yeah, we work with the police and the community security services, but more or less okay.
I was nodding my head there because we did actually in Dublin a very successful Israel Action Day, we called it. Again, it was pre-COVID. It was in February 2019. And it was as a result of a direct response to the Occupied Territories Bill that was very much in focus at the time. And we invited an Israeli guy called Nati Rom. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but he basically coordinates the selling and marketing of products that are produced and sold in Judea and Samaria. So he brought a lot of his products over, and we set up a stall in Grafton Street. That is the main shopping precinct in Dublin City. And we had the flags going, and we were selling the products, and it was wonderful. And we had no problem at all. A couple of comments from people, saying that the bill is going to pass and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, we just advised the police that we would be there. So we knew that should there be any problems, they're in the background, and they would have come and helped us. The police, our experience with the police in Ireland has been extremely positive. So we've never had any problems at all. I think people are too often afraid because they look at what they see on Twitter and on social media and stuff, and they think, we're going to get attacked. But it doesn't happen. It very rarely.
Yeah, there's as far as security is concerned, that is definitely something I want to comment on. Yes, we work with Israeli security and from the Jewish Community Center, and we work with the police. That's the one side. The other side is, since we are doing these events in the middle of downtown, and since it's a public area, of course we do get protests, no question about it. We do have pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and as long as they stay quiet, they can be on the sidelines. As soon as they start disturbing, how do you deal with it? Well, there was one interesting approach that I took a couple of years ago before Corona. We had them standing there shouting, and they were interrupting. The mayor was speaking at the time. And then I said, you know something? I have an idea. Why don't you send up one of your representatives, come up on stage, bring a Palestinian flag, I have an Israeli flag here, and we hold them up jointly. We stand up together here, send a message from Frankfurt for peace. And the girl from the Palestinian side couldn't have done me a bigger favor. It's a video that's still rotating around on Facebook, and a story that made headlines, because she would not touch the Israeli flag with tweezers. She couldn't take this flag in her hand. I was standing there holding the Palestinian flag. Hadn't unfolded it, but I was holding it. And I was ready to send a message. And while she was sending out slogans, and she thought she had a great opportunity here to use up on stage, everybody who was in the audience, who walked by, the politicians that we had there, took away a wonderful message. The peaceful side, the one that was ready to hold up a Palestinian flag and say, we want a peaceful two-state solution, that was that guy, that fanatic, the guy who was supposed to be this pro-Israeli murderer. And this other woman who was shouting, for the poor Palestinians, ruined her case.
with Israel for peace.
Lastly, there's one more point that I want to make, which is also highlighting us sitting here, but the work that Chetz is doing, networks. The Israel Days, the second event that I do, by the way, the third other event I do is the Israel Congress, which is the largest pro-Israel event in Germany. The last one was, again, also before Corona. We had 3,000 participants and 200 supporting organizations. Wow. That's key. And I believe now we're doing this more on a European level, getting organizations involved. Well, the Israel Days, we have tens from different organizations participating and exhibiting their materials, but together we are strong. And that's why we're doing Chetz. When we send out a letter jointly, when we discuss doing something against Palestinian child soldiers, when we decide to do something on a parliamentary level that's important to us. Yesterday we were discussing BDS and what we can do in parliaments as far as BDS is concerned. That's what makes us strong together. Individually, each one of us has a relatively small organization. I don't have a lot of staff. We don't have a lot of funds. No question about it. But as a network, suddenly we have Ireland, we have the UK, we have Belgium, and other countries. That gives us a voice. As Norway, of course. Sorry, I should have said that first.
We know.
Together we are strong, and we should use that.
And together with you guys, this event will also be better. So we encourage you to write your question and send them by SMS to this phone number that you see behind me here, 41176780. And now it's time to bring in the last guest, Natasha Hausdorff from UK Lawyers for Israel. Give them a warm welcome. So some of you may recognize Natasha from her giving lectures to MIF's conference in 2020, then through Zoom in Stavanger. Now she's with us in person, and later this afternoon you will also hear her lecture. But now, what is UK Lawyers for Israel, and what do you do?
Well, Conrad, firstly, it's wonderful to be here in person. I was very sorry that the prior situation kept me from being in person with you before. But I'm extremely proud to once again be here representing UK Lawyers for Israel and UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust, where I now serve as the legal director. We began as a voluntary association of lawyers, and the key message that we have is essentially apply the law. Apply the law equally to Israel, to Israelis. And UKLFI was set up as a reaction to the abuses of law that we have seen. And the concept of lawfare, which we've spoken about at previous conferences, to make sure that there was a voice pushing back against the misrepresentations of international law, but also a voice standing up for people who found themselves discriminated against, either because they were Jewish or because they were pro-Israel. As we've heard a little bit earlier on the panel, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism have, for the most part, now become indistinguishable. And the purpose of UK Lawyers for Israel has been really to provide support for individuals that come to us with issues, and that will be across the board. So we deal with students who are having a terrible time on campus, either with respect to student unions, passing BDS resolutions, singling out, targeting Israel. We also have students who are being taught appalling material and have their reading list filled with anti-Israel articles and are being taught by professors who come at these sorts of issues of international law or international politics with a clear agenda. We deal a lot with public authorities, local government, and that is across the world, really. This began, and our expertise in dealing with these phenomena began in the UK. But through this network and through knowing incredible people acting in different jurisdictions, we've been able to share a lot of the knowledge, the experience, the know-how of how we've grappled with local authorities in the past. And that's applicable across the jurisdictions that we have represented here and many, many more besides. And one of the big areas that we engage with is obviously international law and representations to the international legal bodies that have made the targeting of Israel a priority. And that includes the UN Human Rights Council, that includes the International Criminal Court, where we provided an amici brief, trying to educate the court as well as the prosecutor about some of the international law issues at play. So there's an awful lot that we cover that's given a little bit of a flavour.
Yep.
But I think the key point that I would underline is that our focus is the law, but we can only do so much without the referrals that we have from the people on the ground, the people fighting this in the communities, in government, grappling with politicians, grappling with local government. And that's where we've gained the best contacts, the best network, and the best mutual experience, learning that we can do so much more together.
So, how many of you are doing this full-time, this work? Raise your hand if you do it full-time. Yeah. Because I want to encourage everyone here that, like Natasha is doing this as a hobby, she said yesterday,
Yes.
aside from full-time work and other commitments.
Yes.
But do you have full-time employees in the organization nowadays?
We do, and one of the biggest challenges really that we face is the volume of work. And for a long time we were entirely reliant on volunteers, which is tricky because due to the fact that we get referrals and we get requests, and with a little bit of recognition for what we had been doing over some time, those requests started to flood in on a very regular basis. So we do now we've had for some time a full-time chief executive. I'm very excited that we have just recruited our international director, who may be known to some of you. Her name is Yifa Segel, and she is phenomenal. She set up the International Legal Forum, so she's just joined us on a part-time basis. So we are very much trying to grow. There are a handful of incredibly brilliant and committed lawyers who do work pro bono, and we do as much as we possibly can. I'm in independent practice, so I have a busy court schedule, but my evenings, nights and weekends are generally filled with UK LFI business.
Yeah. So I just want to stress that MIF has worked closely with UK lawyers for Israel in several cases. Like, for example, when we wrote a letter to the Oslo City Council leader explaining why a boycott of the settlements would be illegal, then we were greatly helped by UK lawyers for Israel, and other examples as well, KLP case and others. So if you, Jackie, think about the work being done in these other countries, what are the things that you think is the most important to copy and expand in Ireland to further Israel's case?
Well, I think it's very important. Networking is obviously very important. So what Sacha was speaking about earlier, the fact that we get together, we might do joint ventures, learn from each other, and also learn from each other's mistakes, but it's very important to stand together and to work together. I think so. Probably one of our main challenges in the Ireland Israel alliance would be, I suppose, the recruiting of additional people. We don't actually have any staff, as it were. We're a company. We set up as a company limited by guarantee. We had to do that in order to open a bank account. So that is time consuming in itself. But we have a wonderful team of volunteers. Some of those volunteers have full-time jobs. Others, work in the home. They're varying ages, varying backgrounds, but it would be wonderful to be able to have some, to actually be able to employ somebody, because, as I say, I'm doing this full time, but it would be good to think that I had a team there, and that somebody was ready to kind of step into my shoes, you know, when the time comes, because you know, the Ireland-Israel Alliance is it's a good organisation, it's a solid organisation, and I'm hoping that it will go on for many years to come, unless, of course, we're in that great position where we actually don't need organisations like ours, so we could all go out and do our gardening.
Yeah, Sacha?
The one thing that has changed, I mean, as I said, I've been doing this for 20 years. And one of the critical things that has changed is when we started, and for many, many years, there are so many, at least in Germany, there are many, many pro-Israel organizations in theory. Whether it's from friendship groups in each individual city to the different charitable organizations and whatever. And ultimately, we all love Israel. And across Europe, even more so. I mean, there are literally many, many, many organizations who are not necessarily effective, and who everybody in the past thought they had to reinvent the wheel, do everything differently, and do it, and then, of course, to have their logo on it. That's one of the critical things that has changed, and that keeps on changing in recent times. And that's wonderful when we are sitting here together. We all have slightly different methods of doing things, of course. And each one of us works in a different way. Nonetheless, when it comes to certain critical issues, we share them across the board. And literally not across just within our countries, but across borders. And when we are all we're on the Chetz list, and we're on another European list, and we're getting information much faster these days than ever before. And we're getting videos of critical events that happen in Israel when there are terrorist attacks, whatever. And very often now even, some of the videos that we are receiving no longer have individual organization logos on them. Or when there are campaigns run, it's not necessarily one organization taking the lead. It's we, as a joint group, get the material, we share it, and we can make it available to others. I see my role not as one of where I have to push Honestly Concerned as an organization name or ILI. I want to empower others. And my goal is to reach as many multipliers individuals as possible, and each one of you can have this critical role of using our joint material to get it out there. And last point I'm going to make on that is, that way we can also push different messaging. We can choose the topics that are dear to us. For example, one topic that you do not hear about in Germany very often is the Abraham Accords. Yeah. Israel is not a violent country that keeps on fighting with everyone. Israel is looking for peace, and it's made peace with many countries. Israel has made peace with United Arab Emirates. There are wonderful things happening every day that nobody ever reads about or hears about.
We get many questions from the audience. First is for Natasha. So one of Norway's biggest newspapers have had reporters in Israel in recent days, and they have written several articles where they claim that Israel occupies Palestinian territories in violation of international law. And I know you want to give that answer in a lecture. Now, can you do it in 1 or 2 minutes?
Of course. Well, the longer answer, of course, is still up, I believe, on YouTube. It's a previous session I did for MIF about the underlying international law determining the status of the territory. But the use of the term occupation with respect to what is better termed disputed territories is part of the legal, political battleground. The use of legal terms without their proper meaning. The use of the term occupation in this case is essentially a political term, but it's pretending, it's masquerading as a legal term, which is why you often hear it coupled with the description of illegal occupation. And as a reflection of what international law says, properly applied, I would argue, the status of the territory that Israel recovered in 1967, which had been under Jordanian occupation since the 1948-1949 war has underlying Israeli sovereignty. And it's a rule of customary international law that tells us this, which is called uti possidetis juris. Very simply, and as straightforwardly as I can muster, it basically says that a new state that comes into being inherits the pre-existing boundaries of whatever administrative unit preceded it. In Israel's case, when it declared independence in 1948, the pre-existing entity was the British Mandate. Israel was the only state to emerge in that time, and therefore by application of this rule of customary international law, the entire territory became the State of Israel at the moment of the Declaration of Independence. It's what the International Court of Justice in the Burkina Faso Mali case called the critical date. And it's at that critical date that you get a snapshot, a photograph of the territory. Now, that doesn't mean that those are going to be Israel's borders from now until time immemorial. Why is this rule of customary international law so important? Because it tells us what the original status of the territory was before Jordan's occupation. And it tells us that, therefore, when Israel recovers that territory, it's not properly classed as an occupier. The rules of occupation in international law have been completely misapplied with respect to Israel. It's been singled out, and these are double standards that are applied. And there's one additional example I would give you to sort of buttress the misapplication, and that's, you may all remember that Secretary of State Pompeo came out in the last American administration with his declaration, essentially that settlements were not per se illegal. And this was a reversal of State Department policy that up until that point had been embodied in what was called the Hansel Memo, the Hansel Memorandum. Even that Hansel Memorandum was clear that the occupation that at the time it was suggesting existed would not outlive any peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. That was a memorandum that was written before the 1994 peace agreement. So even by their inconsistent and inaccurate, I would say, reasoning, the term occupation, legally speaking, wouldn't apply after a peace agreement between Jordan and Israel in any event. There are many, many layers of legal analysis that underpin the inappropriateness of the application of the term occupation, and it's unfortunately because of the complexity behind it that it's become so difficult to push back against it. But it's vital that we do, because the misuse of these terms, of occupation, of ethnic cleansing, of colonialism, of expulsions, these are all important terms under international law which are completely misapplied to Israel. They propagate falsehoods, but because they come with the veneer of legal credibility, people are afraid to push back. And I'm very happy to discuss this in more detail later when we look at the Amnesty International report and answer your questions. I'll be here for the remainder of the day. But to arm yourselves with the key facts to be able to push back against these falsehoods, that is the most important thing I think that you can be doing, because that is the real battleground, the real arena in which Israel needs additional support.
So, two other questions from the audience are interrelated, and it's for all of you. So it's, how do you get more young people involved? And what approach do you take when you try to get into schools, universities? If you have any experience with that. Patricia, you want to start?
No, not really. Well, we have tried to reach out to the most easy one that was for us, because very close to us was the Jewish movement at university. Mm. And we have been struggling because they are very much left-wingers. And they have been indoctrinated by the Belgian media so much that even them are today not really wanting to defend Israel, because they use those words themselves. So we need to have tools. And I would reach out to UK Lawyers for Israel to have those tools properly on paper so we can train them. I think our youth will need to be trained because what they hear around them is so false, so full of errors. And if you don't know, you don't start. Yeah. So we have been reaching out to UK Lawyers for Israel, and we had a victory also. It was for council in one city in Belgium who wanted to apply BDS boycott applications. And thanks to their letter, we wrote to them, so they canceled it. So I think at the end of the day, all roads lead to lawyers. Yeah. But in Belgium, sometimes when we are in court, we don't have the good results because even our judges are very left-wingers. And we had this example, I'm sorry, I just make a little detour, of a cafe owner, a Turkish cafe owner in Wallonia, French-speaking part of the country. He wrote a paper on his devanture, on his facade, saying, dogs are allowed, but not Jews. So there is an organization legal against anti-Semitism. They took them in court, and they lost. They lost because the judge proposed that he would write a letter, an apology letter, and that was it. End of it. So it's horrible. So we need more lawyers, but we have to know how to apply, and we need to use this vocabulary and to show to people, the youngsters, why it's wrong.
Before I allow Sacha to comment on how to involve youngsters, I think Sacha is setting a really good example himself by bringing his son to a conference like this. I mean, give a big hand for Joel. And all of us, or many of us, we have kids, we have grandkids. It's a good thing to bring them along. Really good.
I couldn't agree with you more on that one. I think it is very important to start early, and to start much earlier than people are doing right now. I'll give you the good and the bad. The good news in Germany is there is a friendship organization called the Deutsch-Israelische Gesellschaft, DIG. They have a youth forum, UFO, and they are reaching, they're highly political, they also use our material and other material, and they're doing a very good job. The bad news, many of the Jewish kids, who, particularly the ones who go to Jewish schools, leave completely unprepared for what's out there for them. They grow up in a very protected environment, and as soon as they leave the Jewish schools, they're confronted with, at whatever other schools or universities they go to, being expected, not that they want to, but nonetheless, by the outsiders, by the others, being expected to defend and to argue when Israel does this, Israel does that, or some Jews done this, or there was some anti-Semitic incident. They're supposed to know about everything and supposed to be able to comment on anything. And many of them decide to hide their Jewishness as a result. Mm-hmm. We need to start, going back to what you said, start early. And we need to reach our kids in interesting ways. Bring them to celebrations. Start on a positive note. Bring them to conferences. Have a separate youth session. They don't have to necessarily always go through the main sessions. Bring them to music events. And for most, the one thing that I can't stress enough, which unfortunately not everybody can do, is send them off to Israel. Let them see with their own eyes. That's, I think, absolutely critical.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add that that's trying to attract youth is something that we think about on an almost daily basis. Unfortunately, it's not cool. It's not considered cool to support Israel. It's not considered trendy, and I think we all know what's happening in the educational establishments. Very far left narrative is being taught, which is not very friendly towards nation states, etc. So We have reached out, and we do reach out, and we are in contact with a number of young people in the Young Fine Gael movement. Fine Gael is one of the centrist parties who's now in a power-sharing coalition along with Fianna Fáil. So the Young Fine Gael, we are in touch with many of their members, and we are also going into, we've made some headway in going into colleges of further education. We had Yusuf Haddad. I don't know, you may have heard of Yusuf Haddad. He's an Arab Israeli. He actually lives in Israel, and he's a very, very strong advocate for the nation state of the Jewish people. He came over to Ireland a short while ago, and we managed to get him speaking in a college of further education. So that was a first for us. I was absolutely very delighted, because we have, it's been challenging getting into the schools and colleges, to be quite honest. So we hope that is the first of many, and that he will return, and that we'll get other speakers going into the colleges of further education. Thank you.
You want to comment on that? Or?
It's something that we prioritise at UK Lawyers for Israel, and I find myself speaking at campuses a lot. We rely on the students there to raise issues with us, to issue invitations to speak, to come after that knowledge. But I have to say that those requests come in quite thick and fast. There are amazing student organisations out there, including Stand With Us and Camera, that we have worked incredibly closely with, probably for the last decade. And those relationships are important, because they put on student conferences in which they are deluged, with the information that they will need to arm themselves with the truth to interact in these very hostile spaces of not just further education, but now increasingly secondary schools as well. So the earlier the better, absolutely. In terms of educational resources, I'd also point to the pandemic has caused a great number of new developments, including dragging the dinosaurs that we are at UK Lawyers for Israel into the digital age. And we run webinars over Zoom on a regular basis. They're all recorded and available on the UK LFI Charitable Trust YouTube page. And those resources, they're not just, of course, for students, but are intended to provide the groundwork. We have experts from around the world talking about current issues, answering questions from the audience, and providing that knowledge factor to fill that gap. So that's one side, I think, of the challenge with respect to young people and students. But the other side of the challenge isn't just the knowledge of the right and wrong of what is being said, but also how to navigate these processes. When the university when the university authorities are causing difficulties, or when it's the student union that's passing these resolutions, there are processes, there are approaches, there are rights that students need to be told to point to in making their case. And so that's a different kind of training, but it's a very important part of the support that UKLFI and other student-focused organisations and increasingly, I think, other Israel-based organisations around the world are focusing on, and learning the processes of which legislation to point to as a student to get the dean or the president to sit up and listen is crucial. I'll just finish by mentioning one very recent development in the UK, and we've been very engaged with the current Education Secretary and the Department for Education, who have been incredibly proactive on pointing to issues of anti-Semitism in the education system, in particular at universities. And the National Union of Students was yesterday disengaged from by the British government because of the anti-Semitism that is rife in that organisation. They are looking to have an internal investigation, an independent investigator conducting that. But the most important thing is that the government has taken that stance. And everything that we saw with the Labour Party and anti-Semitism and Corbyn, unfortunately, has filtered down, it seems, into the younger level of student politics, has infected the National Union of Students. And hopefully with this huge step that the government has taken, that the Education Secretary has taken, there may be some important changes coming in the future.
I want to...
Can I add out a few more ideas, perhaps? Yep. The question was, how do you reach young people? I'd like to throw out a few ideas of what each one of you can literally do in your hometowns. One thing that I found that works very well, that will be seen as city partnerships. If in your own cities you think of talking to the mayors and see if there's, or even on a school level, partnering with an Israeli school, partnering with an Israeli city. And then as the partnership grows, to invite speakers from Israel. And also what helps, of course, is inviting some other speakers. And I'm sure that Conrad can help you with some of the names, some of the ears. Yosef Haddad was mentioned. Bassam Aid, a Palestinian. There are many people that they can help bring another perspective, a neutral perspective, which is not necessarily seen as such a propaganda perspective, and bring to these events. As I said before, and I mentioned music. Think of where, what your children, your grandchildren, what they like, what interests them. And think of partnering on that level and bringing people together. If you can't take everybody to Israel, as much as I would love to see everyone get on a plane, go off to Israel. But you can bring individuals from Israel perhaps over here, and then for them to meet you, for them to meet your kids, and to talk within your cities, at your schools, etc. Bringing people together.
Great. I want to present you with a hopeful idea. I got a couple of weeks ago. I was in a school in northern Norway, and I was talking to a class of 16-year-olds, and I mentioned Gaza wars, and no one reacted like they knew anything about it. They never heard about it. So my point is, these 16 years old, they don't follow the mainstream news. They don't listen to the Belgium public radio and TV. And does this new development help our case, do you think? That they can bring, do they get more pro-Israel perspectives through social media than they would get if they only had their public
social
services?
Media works both ways.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look particularly today, there are many Nakba Day, so-called Nakba Day demonstrations across Germany and across other countries. And what you are seeing very often at these events are very, very hateful demonstrations. And the demonstrations, if you didn't see the background, you could take the same youngsters from across the board. Why is that? Social media. That's the negative side of things. They've been brainwashed, unfortunately, with hate across borders, across countries, and from Gaza to the rest of the world. Now, can it help on the other hand? Well, it's dangerous on the one hand because social media is not necessarily truthful messaging that is arriving. And if they reach the wrong messaging, that can be very, very dangerous. But, as you said, we can push certain messages too. And if we have the right access, then yes, it can be helpful, but I personally see it as very dangerous on many other respects, because there are certain crowds that are very, very active there and that are very well-financed, and it's very nasty messaging very often, unfortunately.
Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. And we have a new initiative in the UK, the Online Harms Bill, which is partially supposed to address some of the incredible incitement to terrorism, to acts of violence, intense anti-Semitic hate that is online. And I'd say while in the mainstream media, unfortunately, we see an undeniable anti-Israel bias and reporting that just boggles the mind, which is often entirely false, very, very, even more frequently misleading. you at least don't have the calls to violence and the calls which have manifested themselves in acts of terrorism. The recent hostage-taking in a synagogue in the US was directly linked to discussions over social media and calls for that sort of activity. So there were serious repercussions that come out of the social media sphere. And I think the battle there is very much more, well, certainly it's more extreme. There are many, many voices against Israel. And there were very few brave individuals. I'm sharing a platform now with a number of them, well, everyone here. I steer away from social media, but these guys are Twitter heroes as far as I'm concerned. But they are few and far between, and they are often drowned out by the intense vitriol and hatred out there. So who knows? This is something obviously governments are starting to grapple with, how to moderate. We've got a new ownership of Twitter now, with promises that there will be a new era where hate speech and incitement is clamped down on. But the trends so far suggest, to me at least, that social media is a very much more dangerous place for Jews and for Israel than even mainstream media has been, despite the harm that it's clearly done over the decades.
Can I add a small point on that? As far as Twitter is concerned, since you mentioned it, I'm still trying to work my way more into Twitter. In the past, I thought Facebook was everything. It's not. Twitter is actually a very, very powerful way of reaching very high-level people. Many politicians, many newspaper editors, etc., read Twitter. And you can reach them fast and they react to comments, number one. Number two, last point I'm going to make, and I've been talking so much, there is a lot already out there that's available for each one of you to potentially use. Example, I mentioned that there are nasty Nakba demonstrations happening in many, many cities. There's a whole misconception about this whole concept of people having been displaced, which you talked about, and their homes being stolen. And for example, in Germany, we have a 1948 exhibition, which is now actually going international, which has been, and they've already, it's been government funded actually, amongst others, and they've gone from schools to cities, and it's an exhibition which you can pretty much print out on your own. You can get their speaker, you can get it in your cities and put it up on these posters, get a place where you can put it, and it's a wonderful exhibition to educate. And they've done it at schools, etc. And that's available to all of you. And similarly, when it comes to other things, and as I mentioned, speakers, etc., you can get the best of the best in all of your cities too. And it's not necessary. Some of it, of course, if you have to fly a speaker from wherever, it costs. But this exhibition, for example, is not that costly. And if you do it as part of a city partnership, school partnership, whatever, there are ways where each one of you can also help foster the relationships and get active.
Thanks. We are drawing to a close, but we have these four amazing leaders from four European countries, and I want to challenge them to give you all a word of encouragement from this weekend. And maybe we should start with Jackie. I have known Jackie for a few years. She's always so enthusiastic and is doing amazing work. And I think she has some encouragement to give you in the local branches. And please, Jackie.
Yeah, okay.
Fire up.
Okay. Look, I actually see that there are a lot of similarities almost between Ireland and Norway. We're both known for our beautiful scenery and friendliness of our people, etc. So I do kind of feel I have a bit of an affinity with you guys, although it is only my second trip here. I did a cruise a few years ago to the Norwegian fjords, but I digress. But look, I want to encourage you, to thank you. I know many of you have been coming here for many, many years. You're very strong advocates for Israel. I would encourage you to use whatever your talents are. You know, that's something that I'm learning. We're not all gifted with the same gift. So some of us are better speakers, some of us are better writers, some of us are good at encouraging people, some of us are good at writing letters into the newspaper. You know, if you see that there's a lot of negativity in the newspapers and people are writing negative letters in, you know, just if you're good at writing letters, write a letter in. You know, it's amazing. You know, you think, well, what's my little voice going to do? But you never know what seeds are being sown out there. Just because you don't see a result the next day, you know, that people answer, oh yes, you know, if it wasn't for so and so, I wouldn't have known that, or that wouldn't have happened. You just never know what your voice, what seeds you're sowing just by speaking out or just by writing. And my other word of encouragement would be to your children and your grandchildren is to try and get the next generation on board. I know one of an 11-year-old family member of mine completely surprised me the other day. She came up to me and said, Nana, why do you support Israel, you know? And I'm thinking, like, where did that come from? So there's a lot of negative stuff out there, I know, on social media, and I'll mention TikTok is one. There's no way that I am going to go onto TikTok, but I know it's one of the social media platforms that a lot of the younger people use. So your grandchildren, you know, just speak to them, because they might not be talking to you about Israel, but they're hearing it. They're hearing it on social media from platforms such as TikTok and other ones that I probably don't even know the names of. So speak out. Don't be afraid to speak out to family members, young people, get them on board. Thank you for everything that you guys are doing.
Well, from my personal history as a Jew, I can tell you, we cannot win this war without you. And I will be never, ever grateful enough and thank you enough, and you, Conrad, to do this job. Because we are otherwise all alone in the dark with the lies, and all over again. The same lies are the content, but the same lies. So I would say, without you, we cannot win. We are alone otherwise, and we are tiny, tiny little people. You know, we're not many in this world, and we are even less who dare to speak out and to do things. So if I had just one thing I could say to you is, without you, we are nothing. And it's also not only about the Jewish people, because we know that it starts with us. But it never ends with us, because it means that the whole democracy is failing. And I think we owe this to our children. I have no grandchildren yet, but to the future generations. We cannot let it go, because we have to fight for the truth, because we are opposing lies. And it's not about good and bad, as others would like to let us think. It's about justice, and without justice, we have no democracy. So thank you for all what you're doing.
Yeah.
I said it before. Each one of you has different strengths and different things you can do as an individual. Whether it is you want to personally be active and organize a city partnership or an Israel Day in your city, or you prefer writing letters, etc. Jackie said that, or support an organization like MIF, who will then use the empowerment they get from you. And I can tell you as a fact that there is hardly any pro-Israel organization out there that is not financially struggling, but with your empowerment in that sense, they can do the work that you may not be able to do. Last point, look for partnerships. Look for friends. There are many friends out there that people don't think of. For example, at the last large Israel Congress I organized, out of the 3,000 people, we had 500 Kurds. 500 Kurdish friends. They're great. Reach out. We do have more friends out there than we can often think of. So good luck, and thank you everyone for the work that you're doing.
You are all my encouragement. And so that's what I take away from here. As I appreciate the brief was to give you some encouragement, but to see so many of you giving so much continuous support for Med Israel for Fred, and continuously coming to these events, giving your support, taking away knowledge. And I know many of you are running street stalls and constantly pushing back against the messages of hate that are engulfing us, as Patricia has said, in the darkness. So you're already, I know, doing so much. I wish we had this level of support in the UK, and unfortunately, we're still working on that. But everything you, Conrad, have been able to build with your colleagues at MIF is inspirational, is encouraging, gives us the energy to keep going. And to have that kind of cooperation is incredibly, we feel very blessed. You heard a presentation yesterday from Sean Sachs about specifically the role that Norway and the Norwegian government is playing in fueling this conflict. All of the countries represented under MIF have substantial roles. And you are therefore in a very privileged position. Something I can't do as a Brit is act with the same voice to the Norwegian government or the Swedish government and advocate for these points, but you are able to. And that is an incredible gift. And if you, in conjunction with Conrad and his colleagues, with any assistance that UKLFI can give in curating letters, in looking into the relevant laws, and into arming you with the correct position and arguments to be advancing, that is something, of course, that we're all very, very willing to help with. And the last point I would end on is, we've got the truth on our side. And that is an incredible, also additional point of encouragement that I take away from this. And it's something that we can't forget. It's something that we have to hang on to. No matter what it is that is being lobbed in our direction, that is something that should, bring us all back to the surface.
Yeah, by this, we end this session. I hope you were encouraged. Ble dere oppmuntret? Ja. Reis dere opp og gi dem litt applaus. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Oops. Thank you. Da blir det en halvtime pause før vi får høre mer fra Natasha. Så det er pausemat på gangen til de som har forhåndsbestilt. Det er pausemat på gangen til de som har forhåndsbestilt mat, det vil si de som har dagpakke eller overnatting. De som har bare billett til foredragene, de må skaffe seg forfriskninger ute i byen eller i lobbyen. Da møtes vi igjen klokken 3.